it's going to cost me to take the furnace out, fix up the closet, and then put the furnace back. Ugh. It's going to take 2 days and all these things. But anyway, I'm glad nothing else got ruined. All right, so on our normal days, we start our class. We're at lesson 4 now of Hebrew from lesson 1, from day 1. There's supposed to be 6 lessons, and we're at lesson 4. We're supposed to start with an Aleph Bet song. Now that we're at lesson 4, it means we've gone kind of halfway in our alphabet. So, well, we can't do it like this if we're streaming, but I will repeat after you, except that I'll have to do it with you too. So you guys go first. Ready? Go. Aleph Bet Vet. Aleph Bet Vet. Gimel Dalet Hey. Gimel Dalet Hey. Vav Zayin Chet Tet. Vav Zayin Chet Tet. Yud Kaf Chaf. Yud Kaf Chaf. Lamed Mehem Nun. Lamed Mehem Nun. Samech Ayin Pe Fe. Samech Ayin Pe Fe. Tzadi Kuf Resh. Tzadi Kuf Resh. Shin. Sin. Tav Ba Ba Da Ba Dam. Shin. Sin. Tav Ba Ba Da Ba Dam. And then we move to vowel aerobics. Excuse me. If you've got a patach underneath your letter, it sounds like ah. If you've got a kamatz, it sounds like ah. If you've got a chirik, it sounds like e. If you've got a chirik malay, it sounds like e. If you have a segol, it sounds like eh. And if you've got a tzera, it sounds like eh. If you have a kubutz, it sounds like ooh. And if you have a shuruk, it sounds like ooh. If you have a cholam, which is either going to look like a vav with a dot over it or just the dot, it's going to sound like oh. And if you have a kamatz katan, the saddest, most misunderstood vowel, then you're going to sound like oh. And then we go below the line. If you have a resting shva, how am I supposed to tell which one is which? Okay, I know which one is which. This one is a resting shva. You see how the hands are smaller? It sounds like this. This one is a moving shva. I made the hands bigger so it looks like it's closer to you, see? That's moving, so it sounds like this. This is a moving shva underneath the silent consonant, and you need a helper vowel. This one is called a chataf patach, and it's going to sound like this. Ah. This one is a chataf segel. I have no idea why it's squished all the way to the side over there, but it's going to sound like this. Eh. This one is a chataf kamatz, and it's hard to see. Maybe it's the way it printed or something. I don't know. I put the gray in the background so you could see the yellow, because it's going to sound like oh. I don't know why it did that. Then we've got our diphthongs. If you have an O with a y afterwards, it's going to sound like oi. I love that one. You know, if you try to type oi on an iPhone, it will not let you type oi. It will just say it. And it just doesn't work the same way oi does. I've tried, and it hasn't learned. I don't know if it doesn't do as well with 2-letter words or something, but I mean, I've had my phone for a year. I don't know, when did I didn't get it when the 6 came out, and it's a 6, but I've been doing it forever, and it hasn't learned my oi yet. If you have an a with a yud, it sounds like I. And if you have a tzera with a yud, it sounds like a. And those are your diphthongs. Today, I want to teach you, and I don't know, Tim, are we going to be able to see this little teeny thing here? How close can we zoom on that? I don't think the group here can see it at all. So let's write it bigger anyway. So this is a song. Did you watch Sesame Street? Anybody watch Sesame Street? If you, what? He watched it this morning. If you watch Sesame Street, Big Bird had a song he used to sing that went like this. Apgadefki Jekyll and Christu Wixes. It's the most remarkable word I've ever seen. Apgadefki Jekyll and Christu Wixes. I wish I knew exactly what it means. It starts out like an A word, like anyone can see. But somewhere in the middle, it gets awfully queer to me. Oh, Apgadefki. Anyway, essentially what he was doing was singing the ABC and sounding it out. Then there's another song. Let me see. There's another song that the kids sang that was, I'm trying to do this and think at the same time. The one about, I like to eat, 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 eeples and baninis. And you sing that over and over, and then you say, I like to oat, 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 opals and bononos, and it got the kids to understand about vowels. We're going to be doing a combination of those too. Ma, na, sa, a, pa, sa. We're going to take every single consonant-ish. So you'll notice we have an aleph. We don't have a bet, vet. We have a bet and no vet. A, ba, ga, da, ha, va. Za, ha, ta. I'll make it better. Ya, kala. Ma, na, sa, a, pa, sa. And then we have kara, sha, sa, ta. And you don't know all these letters. Well, I haven't taught all these letters yet as far as being able to read them all. But I think this one's fun. And we'll do this a little bit at a time. But let's pretend that under every single consonant is this vowel. We'll start with that one, okay? Which is probably not so realistic, but that's okay. So it would sound something like this. I'll sing it and you could repeat. Abagadahava, abagadahava, zachatayakala, zachatayakala. We're going to take it half and half maybe. We won't do a whole line. Manasa, manasa, apatsa, apatsa. What was I using this? Bunk. Last line we could probably do in one shot. Karashasata, karashasata. It's really bad when you're trying to teach Hebrew and you have these lines in behind because then it looks like it's a whole different letter. Now if we say another vowel, like let's say we have E, so it would sound like this. E, B, G, D, He, V. E, B, G, D, He, V. Zichiti, zichiti, ikili, ikili. Minisi, minisi, ipitsi, ipitsi. Kirishisiti, kirishisiti. Let's do O. Like this. I don't care. You want to make it like that, but it's still going to be Obogodohovo, Obogodohovo. Zochoto, zochoto, yokolo, yokolo. Monoso, monoso, opotso, opotso. Korosho soto, korosho soto. All right, what did we leave out? We didn't do right? Is that too low for you? That's my low voice now. I went to an allergist this week to find out why my throat feels like it's like this. It's Shreveport, I don't know. All right, I'll make it a little higher. Ebegedeheve, ebegedeheve, zechete, zechete, yekele, yekele, menese, menese, epetse, epetse, kereshesete, kereshesete. All right, we didn't do oo. And I saved that one for the last because I have to have a disclaimer for oo. You notice that what I'm doing, I am not trying to force any situation. I may have said some real words in the middle of that, but I'm not intending to say real words. You notice, right? I will say some words that in other languages will make people giggle or blush when we say this one. I'm just saying I'm not intending to do that. If you understand any of these as giggly or blushy words, feel free to giggle or blush because it's fun. Because then you watch to see if anybody else got it and they didn't blush. I will probably blush in the middle of some of these words. That's all I'm going to say. I won't say any more than that. All right, we're going to do oo. Oo, boo, goo, doo, hoo, oo, boo, goo, doo, hoo, zuchutu, zuchutu, yukulu, yukulu. I'm blushing. Munusu, munusu, uputsu, uputsu. Kurushu sutu, kurushu sutu. Anybody else blush? I wouldn't look at you. You could look at me, but I can't look at you. Okay, good. Anyway, we got that out of the way. I like that song. What's supposed to happen is you're supposed to kind of eventually get to a point where you can go, Abagadahava, Zachatayakala, Manasa apatsa, Karashasata, Ibigidi, you know. It's fun. Anyway, that's with every consonant. Although if you counted them, you'd have, I think, 23 in that batch and not 22. Officially, you have 22 characters. Now, I have a chart here that I don't usually hand this one out, but you could have it if you want, or you could invent one if you want. The top line shows us the five. Can you see that down there, Tim? The top line shows us what we learned in the first lesson. So do you see what we have? And I can write them instead. You got it? So can you see it from back there, or is it too small? So the first lesson we learned was B, R, Aleph with A, Sh, and T. The second lesson we learned L, H, M, and Y. The third lesson we learned the very narrow, very straight Vav, and the pizza final tzadi, and a vet with a void in the middle, and a het, which is my none of the above letters, and a final chaf. You'll notice that in lesson 4, we have only 4 letters, and 2 of them are the same letter. And one of them, you already know what it is, so anyway, we'll get there. So I'm going to do what I usually do, although I looked at my part of the tape last time, and even though I make a box here, that's not a good box. It's not a good way of showing. It's going to be more like that. Even though I make a box, I kind of didn't really pay attention to the box. But, you okay? All right. So the first letter we're going to learn is the first letter of our next phrase here, this one. And this one, if you were to try to open and close your eyes, how much noise would that eye make? That's what this sounds like. Actually, this one is a little bit louder than that, but it's close. So this, if I were going to write it, it would go like this. Comes down, swooping like that, and then comes down over to here. That is the letter. I'm not even going to tell you what it's called yet because it's going to mess you up, because it looks like an English letter and it's not an English letter, and the name of the letter has that same English letter in the middle of it, but neither of them are related to the sound it makes, so I don't want to mess you up with it yet. That is essentially a silent letter. It's as loud as your eye. It is not a silent letter. That's why I said essentially silent. Remember that I told you that the aleph is the sound of a glottal stop. It's the sound that your throat makes when it closes down and opens up, like something like that. The ayin is a voiced glottal stop. What does that mean, voiced? A lot of the sounds that you make are just air coming out, and a lot of the sounds that you make are air coming out plus your vocal cords are humming along with it. So for example, I could say, a pe, and the same exact shape for your lips of p, p, p. If I make voice coming out, p, 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 I get b, 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 p, p, b, b, because voice is coming out too. Or I can get like s, and the voice version is z. Or I could get, and the voice sound is v. And there are a lot of sounds that we have with a voiced and unvoiced. So what if your sound is essentially then what happens when you voice that? Then you get your throat closes down and opens up, and you get So some people will pronounce that. You will hear, I don't know if I told you this, if you run into a Yemenite, someone of Yemen, of a descendancy of Yemen, their Hebrew is the most magnificent pronunciation. And so a Yemenite would always pronounce an ayin differently than an aleph, and they'll always say it. Anyone who has a distinction between those letters will say it, but we have no distinction between the silent ish and the silent ish. So if you keep it as silent, you will be fine. No one will really notice the difference. They'll understand you. That's not even one of those, yes, I am from Shreveport kinds of sound differences, because a lot of people will make it like this. So that's the ayin. And the ayin was over here. And let's take a look at, can you see? I'll come close. How's that sound? Was that a bad idea, Tim? Can you see me over here? I didn't know I was doing it either. Okay, I'll go back. But everybody's sitting so far away. All right, I'll write the words out. It's easier that way. So here's some real words using this letter, this letter. If I have that, what would it sound like? Ah. And then if I put a marshmallow mem at the end, what would that be? Am. Am is a nation or a people. So you may have heard the expression about Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is the nation of Israel or the people of Israel. But it has to do more of, it's not the country of Israel. It has to do with the people and not the country. And how about, what's that? E, and that's a resh, and that word is ir, which means city. Ir is a city. And the next one we have is this one. This is a good one to know, especially given when we have our class. This one is a segolate. For the first time ever, I think, I surprised you by giving names to all of these vowels. Did you notice that I told you what vowel names they were? Yeah. You don't have to know the names of the vowels, obviously. You've survived this many weeks without knowing. But the name of the vowel that has the 3 dots is segol. When you have 2 segols together, the noun is called, or the word is called a segolate noun, or segolate. Sometimes it's in a verb pattern too. When you hear that, the 2 es, most Hebrew words have the accent on the last syllable, but these will always have the accent on the syllable with the first eh. That's where the accented syllable will be. So this sounds like eh, and this sounds like rev, but you put it together, it's going to be erev, erev. And the way to say good evening in Hebrew is erev tov, erev tov. Tov is good, erev tov, the adjective is going to follow. So erev tov is a good thing for us to know, especially at this time of day, erev tov. And then the last word that we had to practice with is a really good word for you to know. The word is going to be this. I'll do this one. We have our ayin with that, and that's what? E. And then we have a vet with a resting shva, so that says iv. And then we have a resh with the chirik malay, and that sounds like ivri. And then we put the tav at the end, the ta, and it says, and the accent's going to be on the end because we don't have a segolate. The word is ivrit. Ivrit. Ivrit is the Hebrew language. It's what you're learning how to read here. Ivrit. So if you say, someone says, hey, can you say anything in Hebrew for me? You could say, I could say Hebrew, Ivrit. I could say Hebrew for you in Hebrew. Ivrit. So those are the words that we have as our practice words. When you open up your textbook, that's what's on the bottom of the page as our practice words. I am going to go out of order of how we're teaching these, not in order of what our text is. This says al, that's the first word of this next phrase. And then we've got a new letter, but I'm not going to do the first letter. I'm going to do the second letter in that word first, and you'll see why in a second. This one is what I like to call a narrow-nosed nun. It's only half of the size. It goes from top to bottom, but it's only half of the size of a box of how big all the other letters are. I call it a narrow-nosed nun because if you can draw as well as me, you can turn that nun into a nose. It looks like a nose that's been in a lot of fights, but it is a nose. And then if you do it really well, you can do this and make an ayin in there too. See? Actually, I can leave him there because we're going to come up with another body part. But ayin means eye. Nun does not mean nose, but it looks like a nose. All of our letters are going to be body parts today, face parts actually. So if I have a nun, what are our words for nun? This one. If you are lighting lights for Shabbat or candles for Hanukkah, the word for a candle, that kind of a light, is ner. Ner. Leha hadlik ner, leha hadlik ner, shel Shabbat. The commandment is to kindle the light of Shabbat. Ner, kindle the light of Shabbat. It's built into the word menorah. Ner is in the middle of menorah. You look for roots. All right, so the first word was ner. And this, I can't do the second word yet, but the next word is, that I'm going to practice with you, is this one. Me. Narrow nose nun. No. Me. No. Yep. Menorah. That's the word I was just talking about. Menorah. And you have the nun resh together here. That's the It's got a vowel in the middle, but that shouldn't scare us. Menorah is something that gives off light. It's a menorah. Any of those things could be called a menorah, by the way. It's not just the ones that you use specifically for candles for Hanukkah. And then the last word is the name of a person who comes from one of the other stories. We talked about Esther for a second earlier. So this word is this one. And I'm going to reserve right on that. If I showed you that one, hopefully you would say, nah, right? This one's not going to be an ah this time. And the way we're going to find that out is because of this. Anytime I have one of these composite kamatsus, and the vowel before it is a kamatz, they're both going to be O's. It's kind of a retrogressive assimilation. Oh, what she said. So it's not inappropriate for you to guess that might have been an ah, but you know that has to be an O. And whenever there's this kind of an O preceded by a kamatz, that one becomes an O also. So this says no-o. Me, Naomi. That's the name of the woman in the book of Ruth. Naomi. Which is appropriate. But anyway, Naomi. And the other word that I was supposed to practice with you with your nuns, you can't learn until I teach you the letter that I was supposed to teach you before this. So I will wait a second. So we have two letters then. We learned the narrow-nosed nun, but first we learned the ayin. So we have the ayin and the nun. Now, the other two letters that we are supposed to learn today are actually essentially the same letter. It's just one has a dagesh and one doesn't. So it looks like this. I'll have to stand on this side for this. I want you to take your upper lip and put it on top of your bottom lip like this. And that's the sound that's going to come out, right? So if you take this, that's a core shape that we've seen before, and you put what I'm going to suggest looks like an upper lip. I'm going the other way again now. That's an upper lip. And if you put a pill in it, then you have a p, p, p. So you have your upper lip on the bottom lip, and you put a pill, and it sounds like p. It's the letter pe. The letter pe, the word pe, means mouth. So hopefully this looks kind of like a mouth. So then I got to make a pe out of this somehow. I'm not going to do that. It has, if you recall from the song, when we say samech ayin pe fe, and you notice that these two look almost exactly the same, except one has a pill and one doesn't. Someone suggested this looks like a featureless face, because if you take, instead of your lip, you take your fangs and you put it on top and you make sound come out, it sounds like this. Which, when my older son went through speech therapy in elementary school, they told him that the is the angry goose sound. Is that what an angry goose sounds like? I don't know. I don't stand around long enough to wait to hear it. It's going at me. I don't think that's what it sounds like. Has an angry goose ever attacked you? It's not fun. It's big and scary, and the wings are going crazy. It's not good. So, but this one is a p, p, and this one is a f, f. And they're essentially the same letter. If you saw it in a Torah scroll, or if you saw it in a newspaper where there's no vowels at all, you wouldn't be able to know just by looking at it which was different, because you would see it without the dot in it. And once you know more words and things, you'll be able to tell better whether you'll know if it's a p or a f. But the pe and the fe are essentially the same letter. So we already learned today the letters that we learned. We learned a narrow-nosed nun, and we learned the ayin, which in Hebrew means eye, and we learned the pe, which in Hebrew means mouth. So it's like I said, everything is face parts today, it feels like. But let's practice a little bit using our actual text. Let's see where we've been. Something that we hadn't done before, I don't think in this class, but since we're doing a whole chunk of Torah here, you know that there is a blessing that you say before you study Torah. You can imagine that studying Torah is something that God would like you to do. In other words, study the Word of God. It's something that God encourages. So if you're doing something that God encourages, then there's usually a blessing for that, because it means that you're doing a mitzvah. Mitzvah means commandment, something God is encouraging you to do. I notice how I went from encouraging to say that it means commandment. God is commanding. Are you doing what God is commanding? Well, you have choices. God created us to have choices, so we have a choice. But God commanded us to study Torah. The blessing for studying Torah, you can find it online too at either the B'nai Zion site under the forms page and 100 blessings. But the blessing says, praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You made us holy by giving us commandments. And you commanded us about studying words of Torah. And the blessing in Hebrew is Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I love that, the commandment that says you're supposed to work at the words or the things of Torah. And we're going to do that today. The beginning, first lesson was Bereshit bara. In the beginning, he created. Elohim, in the beginning, God created. Et hashamayim, the skies. Ve'et haaretz. Are you up to this with me? You could do this, right? He created the skies and the land. Ve'haaretz, and the land. Hayata, she was. Tohu vavohu, void and unformed. V'choshech, and darkness. That's as far as we got, that velvety darkness word. And now we're going to find out what happened to that darkness. And the darkness is here. The darkness is al. Al means on or upon. So the darkness is on. What's the darkness on? This word. Panei, which means the faces of. Why do I say faces of? That A ending usually means that it's some things of, it's plural. The word for face is panim. In Yiddish you say punim. You always comes with a squeeze that says, Wudashuna punim. Look at that punim. And there's squeezes and it hurts. So watch out for that punim word. But the word in Hebrew is panim. And panim is always, the em ending gives you a hint that it's usually, the em ending is a plural ending. So a face is always plural. I kind of like thinking about a face as always being plural. Because the truth is you have lots of faces. You have, your happy face, your sad face. And I think about how scary it is or how awesome it is for an infant to recognize someone they love's face. Because that someone has very many faces. It's got the very happy, very tired face. It's got the, oh, look what you're doing face. It's got the 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't believe you're doing this again face. Lots of faces. And that baby has to recognize that how those faces are all of you. And so it's kind of like the never stepping in the same river twice thing. Panei is always plural. So it says al panei, on the faces of, and this next word, I love this word. You know it's coming in the English. And darkness was on the face of the deep. Deep sounds like you're squeaking somebody's nose. Deep, deep, deep. But this word is tahom. That sounds deep, doesn't it? So the word is tahom. So first you get the t followed by a and you just expel all of your breath when you say to. You're feeling breathing. You're feeling somebody breathing, exhaling. And then it ends with this om, tahom. That sounds deep. So in the early days when I would read that word, I would picture that there was darkness on the face of this giant abyss, this huge pit of something, and there was darkness on the face of it. And then I realized that doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if you had a huge pit, then the darkness wouldn't just be on the face. The deeper you went, the darker it would get. And so I started seeing it another way. I see the tahom not necessarily as being this way, but that way. That there was darkness on the face of the deep out there, that it was so deep I couldn't see what else was out there, but there was darkness on the faces of it, for whatever it's worth. But that's a fun word, isn't it? Tahom. And then it says, Viruach, and the spirit or the breath or the wind, Elohim, we saw Elohim again up here, and the spirit of, or the wind of, or the breath of God, and this is an awesome word here, Merachefet. And you see how you have 2 segals here? So that's a segolate, so the accent's going to be on the the che, and it shows you with the trope mark that that's where the accent is. Merachefet. Merachefet means something like hovering, okay? So we're saying that the Spirit of God or the breath of God or the wind of God is hovering. And I hope you heard me say is hovering. There is no such thing in biblical Hebrew as present tense. It doesn't exist. So Mirachefet, even though in my puny English language I have to say something like is hovering, mirachefet is in a verb form that has to do with a continuous action. It's an action that has no beginning and has no end. It's also feminine. You can tell from the e'et ending. E'et, like in other languages, is a feminine ending. So we're saying that something here has an action and the something here is acting as a feminine. So we got to figure out what that is. And we're going back to then the Ruach Elohim and the Spirit of God or the wind of God or the breath of God. We already saw God is acting, it looks plural, but it's acting like a masculine singular. It's the word that means spirit. The Spirit of God is hovering, and it's a feminine is hovering. It's a feminine thing, Ruach. The cool thing about that is many. I mean, it's kind of cool that there's a feminine spirit that's hovering. It's also because you'll notice, and this is pretty consistent, that most often when you see masculine verbs, those are action things that God did and it's done. But when you see feminine verbs, they wind up being things that hang around, that keep happening. Ruach is a word that can be either masculine or feminine. And the fact that when God tells the story about how God created the world, God chose to make it feminine, I like that. I think that's significant. We're still only in the second sentence here. In the first sentence, we see God acting in a masculine way by creating. God creates. And then acting in a feminine way by hovering, spirit hovering. I like that. But I want to point out that so far, just about all we have is darkness, void, unformed, and hovering breath. But the breath is significant. You're going to feel that when you read a lot of these words, like we did with tahom, that it takes your breath away to say these words. Mirachefet, even the mirachefet feels like you've got to exhale all the way. And then it says al panei again. We saw al panei here on the faces of hamayim, the waters. So the Spirit of God is hovering. The Spirit of God is hovering on the face of the waters. God was creating here, and the Spirit of God is, and there's darkness, choshech, on the face of the deep, but the Spirit of God is hovering on the face of the waters, and then we've got another whole place. That's the end of the second sentence. Now we've got the third sentence shown by the Gimel here. Gimel is the third letter officially. Gimel means three, and then it says this. It says va, and you see this yud with the dot over it. There's a dot in it too, and the dot over it is a yo, vayo. This aleph has no vowel of its own, so it becomes part of the o vowel. So it says vayo, and the accent is here, vayo. Then we have a missile mountain mem with an e under it, and the resh, so it says vayomer. And I know it's vayomer and not vayomer, and that's significant. Because what's happening here, I don't know any other language that does this. And I can tell you that it's especially awesome because it is biblical. If we want to say that this is God's word or God's teaching, this is incredibly awesome that it happens in biblical Hebrew. The word yomar means he will speak. The word vayomer, when I add that v, we've already seen v here. V means and. If I add the v, but I change it from an vowel to an a vowel, and I change the accent to move to the front of the word, vayomer, it changes from what looks like future tense, and you're supposed to understand it to be past tense. In other words, it looks like an incomplete action, and you're supposed to understand it as a complete action. I don't know any other language that does that you see one tense, but you're supposed to hear it in the opposite tense. You see a future, and you hear a past. You hear a past, and you see the past, you hear the future, whatever the opposite was that I just said, rewind, do it right. But this says vayomer, and God, what did I say it meant? And God said, Elohim. So here again, like we saw before, the verb comes first and then the noun, and God said is vayomer Elohim. And what did God say? What was the first thing that God said? Let there be light. All right, so I'm going to make you do this. When you hear God's voice, there's nothing. There's void and unformed. There's breath or wind or something. There's deep. When you hear God's voice saying, let there be light, what does God's voice sound like? Who? James Earl Jones? Thank you. Well, it's got to be Darth Vader, right? We just talked about it. Isn't it something like that? Isn't it like a big, boomy voice that rumbles the very core of you? That's something like, let there be light. And then it booms and everything. Well, let me tell you something. Right now, I want to remind you that all we have is breath, spirit. And there's no reason for us to shout this big, boomy voice. There's nothing there. You don't have to yell at it. It's not that intimidating out there. What if you said, we have this word here, Yehi or. Yehi means be, or light. Yehi. I think it's breathing. That's what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like, let there be light. It sounds like, and then poof, there was light. Come on, goosebumps, right? Nothing up my sleeve. Now, I'm not saying that God couldn't have boomed out a, or I don't know, or whatever God sounded like, but I'm just saying that these words are breathing words, and I love hearing the story like this. So, Vayomer Elohim, be light, and light was. And this is another one of those examples when you have, instead of va, you have va, and you see this yud. The yud is a marker that shows that it's a future tense for he will. So it says, and he will be light, or and it will be light, or something like that. But it says will be, but you're supposed to understand it as was. And light was. God said, be light, and light was. Don't you love that? I mean, I love that. So then it says, va, here's another one of those va. We had 3 vas here. We had another sentence here with 3 vas, but this one has 3 vas, which means each one of those is where we're taking, it's called a reversing vav, where you take the and it's about to come up to a verb, and it's making the verb be in the opposite tense. So this says vayar, and it's got a very squiggly trope mark under there, but don't let that scare you, it's still a trope mark. Vayar, and the vayar is, and he saw. And what did he see? Elohim? No, he didn't see Elohim. Elohim was the one doing the seeing. And Elohim saw et. We know what that means. Here it comes, here it comes. What did God see? What did God see? Ha'or, the light. And God saw the light. And that's as far as you get to go today. You only get to say that he saw the light. God saw the light. Ha'or. So a lot of these words are still breathing. That's what's happening. All we have is breath. That's life. All we have is breath. I like that. And that's what it sounds like so far. All right. Any questions about this part? Is this cool? So, I should wait till next time to do this, to teach you the song. So let's start from here again and try to read from the beginning. So you already know these words, right? You can say some of these with me. We've been doing this a long time. Boreshit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. That's the end of the first sentence. We're going to let you say in the beginning, but it also means something like in a heady moment, in a first instance, or with primal stuff, God created the skies and the land. Ve'ha'aretz Haita tohu vavohu. Does it take your breath away? And the land was void and unformed. Vahoshech. And darkness, al panei tahom, is on the faces of the deep. V'ruach Elohim, and the spirit or the wind or the breath of God, merachefet is hovering, al panei hamayim, is, was, and always will be. It's a continuous action, hovering on the faces of the waters. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, be light, Yehi or. Vahi or, and light was. Vayar, and you'll notice, by the way, so or has 2 letters. It's got the aleph and the resh. And vayar here has 2 consonants as part of the root. We miss seeing the end of the word. It's supposed to be resh aleph. Let me show you. Sorry, I'm not going to be lazy here. Just kind of cool stuff. We've seen this before. Oh, that's not a good color for anybody to see that, is that? No. Let's go back to the other side. So this word is light. And then the next word, when it says vayar, So the va means and the yud means he will, and then we have to understand it as he was. But you'll notice that what's left is the resh aleph. That's what's left of the verb. There's a letter of the verb. Remember, well, I don't remember if we talked about it, but we said that the Semitic languages all have 3 root letters. The last letter, which drops out in this case, because it's a pretty weak letter, is a hey. The last letter drops out in that word. So you'll notice that the 2 consonants for the word for light, aleph resh, are the same 2 consonants as the word for see, but they're in reverse order. But there's what I like to call resonance. And we've been seeing this a lot. I still call this something like the goodnight moon effect, that you're talking to a baby world, and there's a lot of repetition. A baby's going to sit there and babble and say the same thing over and over again, practice doing it. And it may drive you crazy, but it's really helpful. So we saw at the beginning where it said, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, v'haaretz. That's a whole word that just gets repeated right there. We saw it in the first 2 words when we said that the first 3 letters are bet resh aleph, and the next word, the whole 3 letters is bet resh aleph. We're seeing repetition there too. We're seeing it when we have al paneh and al paneh. We're seeing it when we have tohu vavohu, and when we have haita, haaretz, haita, tohu vavohu, and all of these are just breathy things. We're seeing these repetitions over and over and over in the way that God is telling this story. You're not going to see that in English. You'll get to see some of those little things, like if it ends a sentence with on the face of the land, and then you see the land. Okay, I'll give you that one. Most of these things you're not going to see. So it says, on the face of it, so it says, and God said, "Let be light," and light was. Vayar Elohim, and even the word Elohim being repeated so many times. We had it here, Elohim. We have it here, Elohim. We have it here, Elohim. We have it here, Elohim. God keeps coming up a lot. And the word Elohim, it's a comforting word. Elohim et haor, and God saw the light. It gets better. This isn't even the coolest part yet. It gets even better. Next time it's even cooler. So, but remember, it's not that I'm expecting that you'll know how to understand all these words. You're not obligated to know these words, and the words there's a lot of interesting things that are going on in the words with the grammar and things, but you should be able to sound it all out. The 4th lesson has only 4 letters before we get to the next part. The next lesson is supposed to have 5 letters. And then the last lesson, and then after 5th lesson, we only have these 5 letters, and then we finish the whole first day of creation. And then there are 7 letters that are not found in the whole first day of creation, only 7 letters. And we'll do that in lesson 6 when we turn to the Decalogue in Exodus. Why do I call it the Decalogue? Because it's 10, but I don't like calling it the 10 Commandments because I have 613 commandments. I don't have 10 commandments. And because there aren't necessarily 10 commandments in there. Have you read it and tried to figure out how many commandments are in there? The first one says, Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha mi'aretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I'm Adonai, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. Command. Where's my command? Give me a command there. There's no. And when you look at something like, you shall have no other gods before me, or no, it says you shall not make any graven images of the things that are flying and the things that are on the ground or the things under the water. You shall not worship them. You shall not bow down to them. How many commandments was that? Not making things, not making flying things, not making swimming things, not making. How many commandments is that? Is it all one commandment or is it lots of commandments? I don't know. Yeah, lots of little ones, but it may not be just one. I don't know. And if it's not just one, then it may change how I interpret what that commandment or commandments are, that commandment group. When it says keep Shabbat or remember Shabbat and what you're supposed to do about it, and it sounds like it's maybe more than one thing. So my point is, number one is I have 613 commandments. I'm not convinced that those 10 commandments are all commandments, or that there's only 10, or that there's as many as 10. I don't know. It depends on how you count them. And then the most important reason is that's not what God calls them. There is a word for commandment, and God never calls them commandments. God calls those things, at one point God calls them Aseret HaDibrot, which are something like the 10 utterances, the 10 things that were said, the 10 statements, the 10 words, which a good translation is if you plop it into the Greek and you say Decalogue, that sounds just like Aseret HaDibrot. So I try to call it Decalogue, and I do it just to mess with you. I could call it 10 Commandments too, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I would like you to think about stuff. I want you to stretch. I want you to take it a little bit beyond what you already thought about in some ways, not just see things the way you've always seen it. I just wanted to mess with you. For example, when you say, and that's actually a kind of a mode that happens in Hebrew. In English, when you communicate, the appropriate way of communication sometimes is more like the parrot method. Hello, hello. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. You know, there's this kind of a parroting thing or mirroring. But in Hebrew, it's more like a adding. So you might say, if I say good morning to you, the way to say good morning is boker tov, good morning. And if I say good morning to you, the appropriate answer, you could say good morning right back to me and that would be fine. But usually people will say boker or, a morning of light, that you're adding a new layer to it. And it's not just the parrot part, it's adding to it, enhancing. I like that. So actually, if this is your fourth lesson, maybe it's time for you to learn, other than how to say Hebrew in Hebrew, Ivrit, maybe you should learn how to say something to each other. So how about if we say, turn to somebody, anybody. And this, by the way, so when you take language acquisition classes, when you learn how people learn languages, whether it's a child or whether it's a grown-up, you find out that in language classes, it's one of the only times that people ask you questions, the majority of the questions, that you already know the answers to. I mean, in other classes, they'll ask you questions like, what's, 52, the cosine of what, I don't know what. You didn't know, you have to think about it first. But if they say, and what color is this ball? You know what color the ball is, and you're asking them, and this is kind of a stupid conversation if you think on the scale of conversations here. But it's appropriate in a language class. The same thing is going to be true when we talk about politeness things. If we are taking a class with each other, there are going to be moments where we may be talking to each other and not even looking at each other when we do it. And this may be one of those moments. So I want you to find somebody else, and I want you to say, Shalom. Shalom. And then you're obviously going to say shalom back. Forget what I just said about adding. Right now, that's the only word you know. Shalom. Let's write it down. Make sure you know how to read it. Shalom. It's one of our reading words that we'd had before. Shalom. And now, I want you to turn to a guy. So we've split the room. We've got the women on this side and the guys on this side. I want you to turn to a guy. But if you're on that side of the room, you have to turn to a guy. Don't look at us, look at them. And I want you to say to the guy, this is what I want you to say. You're going to say this word. What's this word? Ma. And then, okay, I'm going to pretend that this makes some sense. If it's a guy, you're going to say shalom cha. And because this is a question, ma means what? Shalom is from shalom, in case you couldn't tell. Shalom cha means your shalom, your peace. What's your peace? How complete are you? What's your peace? So you're going to say, turn to a guy and say, ma shalom cha, ma shalom cha. And let's say, how you guys doing, okay? So the guys, the answer is going to be, and I know you haven't learned all these letters yet, but this is a t. It's a tear at the top, t. And that's an o and a v, tov. That means good. Tov, and you're going to learn how to say thank you, and I know you don't know all these letters yet, but you're going to say Tov Toda, good thanks. Tov Toda, that means good thanks. So let's try it again. Turn to a guy and say, Ma Shlomcha. And the guys are going to say Tov Toda, that's good thanks. Now, if you want to turn to a woman, you've got to say, instead of Ma Shlomcha, because cha is the possessive ending for your, only talking to a guy, is Ma Shlomech. So it looks the same. If you took away all the vowels, these two words would be exactly the same. But these vowels change things. So this one is to a guy, you say ma shlomcha. Turn to a gal and say ma shlomech, ma shlomech. I'm blocking your words. Ma shlomech. And the ladies are going to say tov toda. You could say tov toda. Good, thanks. Pick a different guy and say ma shlomcha. And the guys are still going to say tov toda. That's all you know. And turn to a different gal, which is getting harder to do. Ma shlomech. And the gals are going to say tov toda. See, the more Hebrew you learn, the more answers we can have, I guess. So you could say good, thanks. So you now know some real Hebrew. You know how to say hello. You know how to say goodbye, because goodbye is shalom. And you know how to say, how are you? Good, thanks. Ma shlomcha, tov toda, ma shlomech, tov toda. Some real Hebrew. And you knew shalom. Shalom has to do with completeness. The word in Hebrew for to pay, like when you go to a restaurant and you want to pay, the l is to sha, lisha, lem, lishalem. You complete your transaction, to complete, the word completeness and wholeness, lishalem, that means to complete, from the same root as shalom. Shalom, ma shalomcha. Anyway, there's a song that we teach our kids that they start singing before they're 3 years old when they go to religious school or the summer camps and things like that, and it goes like this. Shalom chaverim, shalom chaverim, shalom, shalom. That means goodbye friends, goodbye friends, goodbye, goodbye. Try it. Shalom chaverim, shalom chaverim, shalom, shalom. And then the next word, the last word is lahitraot. Lehitraot. Lehitraot is a reflexive form of this verb, lehitraot, which means something like au revoir in French, where you say to see you again, until we see each other again. That's lehitraot. But it sounds like to hit the road, because it's what you say when you go. But it's lehitraot. Lehitraot, lehitraot, shalom, shalom. So the whole song goes like this. Shalom chaverim, shalom chaverim, shalom, shalom, lehitraot, lehitraot, shalom, shalom. Goodbye, friends. Toda, thank you. And I'll see you next week. And next week we'll talk about whether or not we want to continue the last week of the month, because for many people that's spring break. Shalom, toda. Thank you, guys.